Karen spent the next 48 hours in what she called research mode, a methodical investigation approach she perfected during her 20-year career as a forensic accountant before retirement. Her dining room table disappeared under stacks of legal documents, property records, and engineering surveys. That historical landmark designation was just the beginning. Her bridge had been registered with the National Register of Historic Places in 1987, complete with federal protection status. The HOA's demolition wasn't just illegal, it was a felony. But as Karen dug deeper, she discovered something far more interesting. The original property deeds from 1923 showed something peculiar about the lake that gave Piney View its name. The entire body of water was artificial, created by a dam system that her great-grandfather had built and maintained under a private water rights agreement. The dam, hidden among the reeds and cattails at the lake's southern end, was still technically owned by the Whitmore family trust. Karen's pulse quickened as she read the fine print. The water rights agreement granted the Whitmore family perpetual control over lake water levels for property maintenance and agricultural purposes. The document was ironclad, written in an era when property rights were absolute and legal challenges were rare. She grabbed her phone and called her lawyer, Elizabeth Santos. "Liz, I need you to look at something. How enforceable is a 1923 water rights agreement?" "Depends on the language and whether it was properly recorded." "Why?" "Because I think I own a dam that's been feeding the HOA's precious lake for a century." Elizabeth's laugh was sharp. "Send me everything. If what you're saying is true, you might have more power than you realize." That evening, Karen walked to the dam for the first time in years. The structure was overgrown with vegetation, but the mechanical components were surprisingly well preserved. A large wheel valve controlled the water flow, and a series of smaller gates managed overflow during heavy rains. She turned the wheel experimentally. It moved easily, despite decades of neglect. The water level in the lake dropped visibly within minutes. Her phone rang. "Margaret Chen." "Karen, we need to talk. I think there's been a misunderstanding about your bridge situation." "Really? What kind of misunderstanding?" "Well, it seems the demolition crew may have been a bit overzealous. We're prepared to offer compensation for the inconvenience." Karen smiled, watching the water level continue to drop. "How much compensation?" $20,000. "And we'll build you a new bridge, something more modern and safe." "Margaret, do you know what my bridge was worth?" "I'm sure we can negotiate. It was appraised at $150,000 last year. And that was just the construction value, not including its historical significance." Silence on the other end. "But here's the thing, Margaret. I don't want a new bridge. I want my bridge back. The exact same bridge, rebuilt with the original stones you just destroyed." That's impossible. The stones are at the bottom of the creek. "I know. That's going to make reconstruction expensive, isn't it?" Karen turned the dam wheel another quarter turn. Through the trees, she could see the Pineview Resort's lakefront restaurant, its deck extending over what was rapidly becoming a much smaller body of water. "I'll call you back, Margaret. I need to think about your offer." She hung up and continued turning the wheel. The lake that had taken her great-grandfather 3 years to fill was going to take her about 6 hours to drain. Karen woke to find 3 news vans parked outside her property. Apparently, someone had leaked the story to the press. She smiled, knowing exactly who that someone was. Tom Bradley from the county engineering department had promised to contact his friend at Channel 7 if the HOA didn't cooperate. The morning news report was everything she'd hoped for. "Lake drained in HOA dispute" scrolled across the bottom of the screen while aerial footage showed the devastated resort grounds. The reporter, a young woman with perfectly styled hair, stood in front of the exposed lakebed. "This is what remains of Pineview Lake after homeowner Karen Whitmore opened a century-old dam in response to her HOA's destruction of her historic bridge. The resort, valued at over $4 million, is now completely non-functional." Karen's phone rang. Elizabeth Santos. "Karen, you've created a media sensation. The story is going viral on social media, but we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" The HOA is claiming you're in violation of environmental regulations. They're saying the sudden drainage could harm fish populations and wetland ecosystems. Karen looked out at the muddy lake bed, where several herons were actually having a feast day picking through stranded fish. Are they right? Technically, yes. But the environmental damage from their unpermitted demolition is arguably worse. It's a legal standoff. By afternoon, the situation had escalated beyond anyone's expectations. The State Environmental Agency had arrived with a full investigation team. The FBI's Art Crime Unit was examining the destroyed bridge remnants. 3 different law firms were issuing contradictory statements to the press. Karen found herself in the bizarre position of being simultaneously a victim and a perpetrator, depending on which lawyer was speaking. Her doorbell rang again. This time, it was Margaret Chen alone, looking haggard and defeated. Karen, I need to be honest with you. The HOA board made a mistake. A big mistake. I know. The resort investors are threatening to pull out. We're facing lawsuits from multiple parties. The entire development could collapse. Karen gestured for Margaret to sit. I never wanted to destroy the resort, Margaret. I just wanted my bridge back. But the bridge stones are still there, at the bottom of the creek. A marine salvage company could recover them. It would be expensive, but possible. Margaret's eyes widened. You've looked into this. I've been planning this conversation for 3 days. The bridge can be rebuilt using the original stones. It will cost approximately $1.8 million and take 6 months. The alternative is watching your resort die while we fight in court for the next 5 years. And if we agree to rebuild the bridge, I close the dam. The lake refills. The resort survives. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. There's something else. The board voted to remove me as president last night. They're blaming me for the whole situation. Are they? Brad Kowalski is taking over. He's the one who pushed for the aggressive demolition approach. He thinks we should fight this legally rather than negotiate. Karen felt a chill. Brad Kowalski was the HOA member she'd seen directing the demolition crew. He was also, according to her research, a real estate developer with a history of controversial projects. What does Brad want to do? He wants to drain the lake permanently. He's claiming it's an environmental hazard that needs to be eliminated. He thinks he can force you to sell your property to the HOA for development. Karen stared at Margaret. He wants to destroy the lake to get my land? He's already contacted the state about having the dam condemned as a public safety hazard. If he succeeds, you'll lose your water rights, and the HOA will acquire your property through eminent domain. Karen's hands clenched into fists. She'd been playing chess while Brad Kowalski was playing war. Margaret, I need to know something. Are you willing to stand up to him? I don't have any power anymore. The board. The board doesn't own those water rights. I do. And I'm not selling. By dawn, Pennyview Lake had dropped 4 feet. Karen stood on her deck, sipping coffee, and watching the resort's boat dock emerge from the water like the skeleton of some prehistoric beast. The floating restaurant platform tilted at an alarming angle, its support pontoons scraping against the newly exposed lakebed. Her phone had been ringing incessantly since 5 a.m. Karen, what the hell have you done? Margaret Chen's voice was shrill with panic. The entire resort is compromised. I'm conducting property maintenance, Margaret. It's well within my rights, according to the 1923 water agreement. What water agreement? There's no. Check with your lawyers. I'm sure they'll find it fascinating reading. Karen ended the call and immediately dialed Elizabeth Santos. Liz, they're going to sue me. How solid is our legal position? Surprisingly solid. The water rights agreement is bulletproof, and the historical landmark violation gives us significant leverage. But Karen, draining the lake is aggressive. They're going to claim economic damage. Good. Let them. Do you know what economic damage looks like? It looks like my destroyed bridge. By noon, the lake had dropped 8 feet. The resort's problems were multiplying exponentially. The lakefront restaurant was completely unusable, its deck now suspended 15 feet above muddy shallows. The boat launch had become a concrete ramp leading to nowhere. Most dramatically, the resort's signature infinity pool which had been designed to create a seamless visual connection with the lake, now overlooked a landscape that resembled a construction site. Karen's doorbell rang. She opened it to find Margaret Chen flanked by two men in expensive suits. "This is David Hoffman from our legal team," Margaret said, her composure barely intact. "We need to discuss this situation rationally." "Of course. Please come in." They gathered in Karen's living room, where the water rights documents were spread across her coffee table like evidence in a trial. David Hoffman leaned forward. "Mrs. Whitmore, we understand you're upset about the bridge, but this response is disproportionate. You're causing millions of dollars in damage to a legitimate business." "Am I? Or am I simply exercising my property rights? The lake serves dozens of families. I can't just what? Manage my own water rights? Control my own property?" Karen's voice remained calm, but her eyes were steel. "You know what you can't just do? Destroy a federally protected historical landmark without permits." Margaret shifted uncomfortably. "We're prepared to increase our compensation offer. $50,000 plus a complete bridge reconstruction, using the original stones. The original stones are scattered. We can source matching limestone." "No." Karen stood and walked to the window. The lake was now down 10 feet, and she could see resort guests standing on balconies, pointing at the receding waterline in confusion. "You destroyed something irreplaceable, something that connected me to 4 generations of my family. You think matching limestone makes that right?" David Hoffman's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his face paled. "Mrs. Whitmore, we have a problem. The State Environmental Agency is launching an investigation into the bridge demolition. If they find violations—" "They will," Karen said simply. "Because there are violations. Multiple violations. The resort could face federal charges. The entire development could be shut down." Karen turned back to face them. "Then I suppose you have a choice to make. You can continue fighting me, in which case I'll keep the dam open and cooperate fully with the federal investigation, or you can make this right." Margaret's composure finally cracked. "What do you want?" "I want my bridge back. The exact same bridge, rebuilt stone by stone. I want it done by a historic preservation specialist, and I want the HOA to publicly apologize for destroying a protected landmark." "That's impossible. The cost alone would be about $2 million, Karen finished. "Roughly half of what you're losing in resort bookings every day this lake stays drained." The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of confused voices from the resort grounds. "We need time to consider. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, I'm calling the media." Karen's counter-strategy was elegant in its simplicity. If Brad Kowalski wanted to play hardball, she'd give him a game he'd never forget. She called an emergency meeting of the full HOA membership, not just the board, but every property owner in Pineview. The meeting was scheduled for the resort's main conference room, which was now accessible only by walking across the muddy lakebed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen began, standing before an audience of angry homeowners, "I want to tell you about a bridge." She prepared a presentation that was part legal brief, part history lesson, and part environmental impact study. The destroyed bridge wasn't just her personal loss. It was a piece of regional history that had been illegally demolished to make room for resort expansion that would benefit only a few investors. The bridge was built in 1923 by my great-grandfather as part of a flood control system that created this lake. For a century, it served not just my family, but every resident of this community. Children learned to fish from its stones. Couples got engaged on its arches. It was in our community newsletter, our promotional materials, our property value assessments. She clicked to the next slide, showing the financial projections for the resort expansion. The bridge was destroyed to make room for a private helicopter landing pad. Not additional housing, not community amenities. A helicopter landing pad for resort guests who don't even live here. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Margaret Chen, sitting in the front row, looked vindicated. Brad Kowalski stood up. "Mrs. Whitmore is manipulating you with emotional appeals. The fact is, she's destroyed our lake and is holding our community hostage." "Have I?" Karen smiled. Or have I simply revealed what happens when we prioritize profit over preservation? She clicked to her final slide, a detailed plan for historical restoration, environmental remediation, and community development that would cost less than the proposed resort expansion and provide lasting value to all residents. I'm offering the HOA a choice. We can rebuild the bridge using historically accurate methods, restore the lake to its natural state, and create a community landmark that will increase property values for everyone. Or we can continue fighting while the resort dies and our community becomes a national symbol of suburban excess. The vote was unanimous. Brad Kowalski's expansion plans were terminated, and he was removed from the board effective immediately. 3 months later, Karen stood on her rebuilt bridge, watching the lake refill as the restored dam system operated exactly as her great-grandfather had designed it. The original stones, painstakingly recovered from the creek bed, had been reassembled by master craftsmen who specialized in historic preservation. The resort had survived, but in a different form. The helicopter landing pad became a butterfly garden. The oversized lakefront restaurant was converted into a community center where residents could hold meetings and events. Karen's phone rang. Elizabeth Santos. Karen, I have news. The FBI's investigation is complete. Brad Kowalski has been charged with multiple federal crimes related to the bridge demolition. Apparently, he knew about the historic designation and proceeded anyway. Will he face jail time? Probably. But here's the interesting part. The investigation uncovered evidence that he was planning to drain the lake permanently and develop your property whether you sold or not. Your water rights challenge probably saved the entire community. Karen leaned against the bridge railing, feeling the solid limestone beneath her hands. Liz, do you think I overreacted? You drained a lake to save a bridge. Most people would call that extreme. Most people don't understand what it means to lose something irreplaceable. Karen ended the call and walked to the center of the bridge, where a small bronze plaque had been installed. Whitmore Bridge, rebuilt 2025, in memory of all things worth preserving. The inscription was her idea, but she'd left space for one more line. Something was still missing from this story, something that would determine whether her victory was complete or merely temporary. That evening, as she watched the sunset reflect off the restored lake, Karen noticed a car parked at the edge of her property. A young woman stepped out, carrying a camera and notebook. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Jennifer Walsh from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. I've been following your story, and I have a proposition that might interest you. Karen smiled. The story wasn't over yet. Karen Whitmore stood at her kitchen window, coffee mug trembling in her manicured hands, as she watched the yellow excavator tear through her century-old stone bridge. The machine's mechanical arms swung like a destructive pendulum, each strike sending chunks of limestone tumbling into Willow Creek below. Those absolute bastards, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant rumble of machinery. The bridge had been in her family for 4 generations, a beautiful arched structure that connected her lakefront property to the main road. More importantly, it was the only way to access her late husband's memorial garden on the other side of the creek. Now the Pineview Resort Homeowners Association was destroying it, claiming it violated some obscure easement clause buried in municipal code. Karen's phone buzzed. A text from Margaret Chen, the HOA president. Sorry for the inconvenience. The bridge removal is necessary for the new resort expansion. We've installed a temporary wooden walkway downstream for pedestrian access. A temporary wooden walkway. For a bridge that had survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and countless floods. Karen scrolled through her phone, finding the video she'd recorded earlier. HOA board member Brad Kowalski, directing the demolition crew, his polo shirt pristine, despite the dust clouds surrounding him. In the background, she could see the skeletal framework of the new Pineview Resort rising like a monument to suburban excess. Necessary for resort expansion, she muttered, replaying Margaret's voicemail from last week. The woman's voice had been sickeningly sweet. I'm sure you understand, Karen. The resort brings significant value to our community. Your little bridge is just, well, it's an obstruction to progress. Progress? Karen had lived in Pennyview for 37 years, long before it became a gated community paradise for tech executives and pharmaceutical salespeople. She'd watched them transform her quiet lakeside neighborhood into a maze of NC mansions and artificially landscaped common areas. The excavator's engine cut off suddenly, leaving an eerie silence. Karen watched the operator climb down and walk toward a black SUV, where Margaret Chen stood clipboard in hand, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the morning humidity. Karen's landline rang. She answered without looking at the caller ID. "Karen, this is Tom Bradley from the County Engineering Department." His voice carried an unusual tension. "I need to ask you something about that bridge demolition. Do you know if the HOA pulled proper permits?" "Permits?" Karen's grip tightened on the phone. "I assumed they had everything in order. That's the problem. There's no record of any demolition permits for your bridge. None at all. And Karen?" Tom paused. "There's something else. That bridge is listed as a historical landmark with the State Preservation Society. Destroying it without proper authorization is a federal crime." Karen's coffee mug slipped from her hand, shattering on the kitchen floor. Through the window, she watched Margaret Chen shake hands with the excavator operator, both of them smiling as if they'd just completed a successful business transaction. The HOA had made their first mistake, and Karen Whitmore was about to make it their last.